and welcome to the University of Toronto's Summer Academy podcast series. My name is Ranji, and I'm your host. This morning, we have students from the Global Citizenship program, and they'll be talking about food insecurity. Before we begin our conversation, can we just ask everyone to introduce themselves? Can you tell us your name and where you're from?
Hi everyone, I'm Kiyoshi and I'm from Japan.
Thank you, Ranji. I'm JP and I'm from Mexico.
Hello everyone, my name is Woody and I'm from Taiwan.
Hi, I'm Aika and I'm from Japan.
Thank you, and welcome to the studio. First question for you would be, why did you choose Ivory Coast for your study on food insecurity?
Why we chose Ivory Coast is because first, we want to know how Africa is facing serious food insecurity that has continued for a long decade. Another reason is that we chose Ivory Coast is because it is known as one of the wealthiest countries in Africa, and we want to figure out how the Ivory Coast is aware of food insecurity.
Can you tell us something about Ivory Coast, the country you've selected?
Okay, so Ivory Coast is located in West Africa and it faces the Atlantic Ocean. Ivory Coast is a democratic republic governed by a president. Ivory Coast has experienced being colonized by France, and some political systems are still strongly influenced by France, such as the judicial system, which is made based on French politics.
Thank you for telling us all about Ivory Coast. Now we can go into the details about the causes of food insecurity.
So now I will be introducing the first cause of food insecurity in Ivory Coast. Even though Kiyoshi mentioned that Ivory Coast is one of the most wealthiest country in Africa, but poverty still remains one of the most significant drivers of food insecurity in Ivory Coast. Nearly half of the population lives below the national poverty line, and about 35% survive on less than $1.22 a day. This stark reality means that a large portion of Ivorians simply cannot afford to buy enough food to meet their daily needs. The situation is particularly dire in rural areas, where access to resources, markets, and economic opportunities is limited. Economic inequality further compounds the problem, as marginalized groups, including woman-headed households and smallholder farmers, face systemic barriers in accessing land, credit, agricultural inputs, and education. These inequalities restrict their ability to improve productivity and income, trapping many in a cycle of poverty and food insecurity. Despite Ivory Coast's economic growth and effort to reduce poverty, these disparities persist, highlighting the urgent need for inclusive development strategies that reach the most vulnerable. And now I'll introduce Aika to represent the second effect.
Thank you, Woody. There are five effects to that. The first one is inability to afford food. People lack the income to purchase enough food, leading to hunger and other nutrition. Second one is poor diet quality. Even when food is available, it is often not nutritious, affecting health, child development, and productivity. Fourth one is rural vulnerability. Limited access to markets, land, credit, and education means rural populations, especially women-headed households and smallholder farmers, are trapped in a cycle of poverty and food insecurity. Fifth one is persistent inequality. Economic growth benefits are unevenly distributed, leaving the most vulnerable behind and maintaining chronic food insecurity. So based on the cause and effect, JP will talk about solutions.
Okay, yeah. As Woody and Aika were saying, we reviewed the causes and effects of food inequality, but I think the most important topic here is how to solve. So I prepared some solutions that can really help Ivory Coast growth, not only as a community, but economic growth and every way there is. So as Woody was saying, a big reason why people in Ivory Coast is hungry, it's simple, they don't have money. Many families live on less than $1.22 a day, so that's why. One of the things that can help us is giving support directly to families. What I mean is giving a small cash amount to families that the government can help with that. so they can afford food, they can send their kids to school or go to the doctor. Cause it's not just a not eating problem, you know. It's actually affects your health and affects your mind. So kids don't really have like the energy or who they needs to go to school. Also, as Aika was saying, women cannot work. So women, I think a solution will be to giving them more chances, like giving them the chance to access to land or credit. Because right now, women don't get access to land or credit. So it's really helpful to have both parents in a household working. And by the end, it's training more people to do jobs, especially in farming. Because as Kiyoshi was saying, the economic growth of Ivory Coast relies on agriculture. So it's really important to start training them so they can work in rural areas and they have more ways to earn money beyond farming.
Thank you, JP. And now I'll be introducing the second cause of food insecurity in Ivory Coast, which is agriculture. Agriculture is the backbone of Ivory Coast economy, employing the majority of the population and contributing significantly to GDP. However, smallholder farmers, who cultivate about 84% of the arable land, face numerous challenges that undermine food security. Unpredictable weather pattern is one of them, including droughts, irregular rainfall, and flooding, frequently damage crops and disrupt farming cycles. For instance, flooding in the Sasindra region has devastated plantain plantations during critical harvest periods. Beyond climate shocks, poor farming techniques and accelerated land degradation reduce soil fertility and crop yields. Many farmers lack access to quality seeds, fertilizers, and equipment. This made them rely mostly on manual labor, which limits productivity as a result. Post-harvest losses are alarmingly high too. Up to 40% of crops are lost due to inadequate storage, poor handling, and deficient rural infrastructure, especially in areas where poor roads exist. Additionally, Ivory Coast agricultural policy has historically prioritized cash crops, like cocoa, which now accounts for nearly half of the world's supply. While cocoa generates significant export revenue, this focus has often come at the expense of food crop production. Small farmers who have shifted to cocoa cultivation struggle with low and unstable incomes because of price fluctuation and delayed payments, leaving them unable to sustain their own food needs. This imbalance reduces local food availability and increases dependence on expensive food imports, which later on exaggerate food insecurity in the Ivory Coast. And now I'll pass on the mic to Aika to introduce the effect.
Thank you, Woody. So there are six main effects. The first one is lower crop yields. Climate shocks and poor farming methods reduce the amount of food produced. Second one is high post-harvest losses. Much of the food grown is lost before it reaches market, reducing local availability. Next one is limited productivity. Lack of tools, fertilizer, and training limits how much food small farmers can grow. Fourth one is export over food. Prioritizing cocoa for export means less land and support for food crops, reducing domestic food supply. The fifth one is unstable incomes. Cocoa farmers face fluctuating prices and delayed payments, leaving them food insecure despite being producers. Lastly, increased import dependence. With lower local food production, Ivory Coast relies more on costly food imports, which makes food less accessible. So I pass mic to JP to hear solutions.
Okay, so it's also a big problem about agriculture. So as Woody was saying and Kiyoshi was saying, most people in the Ivory Coast work on farming. A lot of the country's money comes from cocoa. It's the most important farming in Ivory Coast. But this also means if something goes wrong with cocoa, like prices dropping or crops failing, it's a big problem because all the countries it seems affected. So one way to fix this is to help farmers grow more than just cocoa. As Aika was saying, farmers are centering just in growing cocoa, so they rely a lot on import food. So they don't have their own food. So helping them to farmers grow more than just cocoa. If they could go also grow like crops like rice, corn, and vegetables, it will help feed their own families and reduce dependency on imports. Farmers also need better tools like machines, good seeds, and fertilizers to get better harvest. Many still work with their hands and lose a lot of their crops after harvest because of bad storage or transport. As Woody was saying, there are not roads to get some from rural places to big cities. So fixing roads and building better storage will help them to keep more of what they grow. So now I would like to know the last and third cause.
Thank you, JP. And now I'll be introducing the last cause of food insecurity in Ivory Coast, which is conflict and violence. Conflict and violence in Ivory Coast and neighboring countries have worsened food insecurity. Over 66,000 refugees from Burkina Faso, mostly women and children, have arrived in northern Ivory Coast, strengthening the local resources and services in already vulnerable areas. Ivory Coast's own history of civil unrest, especially the 2010 to 2011 post-election crisis, disrupted farming, displaced people, and damaged infrastructure. This leads to food shortages and higher malnutrition, even as stability returns. The lasting effects of displacement and market disruption continue to threaten food security. Conflict destroys crops and livestock and creates fear that disrupt economic activities and food accesses, making it essential to address these challenges to improve food security. And now, Aika will introduce the last effect of the cause.
Thank you, Woody. So I'll introduce five effects for that. So first one is strained local systems. Refugees increase pressure on food, water, and services in already poor regions. Second one is disruption of agriculture. Violence and fear prevent people from farming or accessing markets. Third one is displacement. Families lose homes, land, and livelihood, which reduces food they're accessing income. Next one is infrastructure damage. Conflict destroys roads, storage facilities, and markets, hampering food distribution and access. Lastly, long-term insecurity. Even after conflicts end, the economic and social impacts persist, leaving communities vulnerable to hunger. So I'll pass mic to JP to introduce solutions.
Thank you, Aika. So as Woody was saying, a lot of conflicts and refugees inside of the Ivory Coast. The past violence in Ivory Coast and refugees arriving from nearby countries have added extra pressure to the country. What can help them is giving more support to both refugees and local communities, hosting them food, healthcare, and education. Also reviewing things like roads, farms, and homes in the areas that were affected by conflict and can help people get back on their feet. So it's not just like take refugees out. We need to take care of them, and they can also help the economic growth as they can help farming and they can start having jobs. Also, in the government and policy changes, right now most of the focus is on cocoa because it brings money from exports, but it's just not enough. The government could start supporting farmers who grow food crops too, with subsidies or better prices. Also having insurance for farmers, so if there's a flood or a drought, they don't lose everything. Could be like changing, because imagine if you're having your crop and then a drought comes, you lost everything. You don't have no money, you don't have no food. So the government helping in those areas will be really, really, really good. So Kiyoshi, would you like to summarize this all like of the podcast and give us your point of view? What do you think about what we just said?
Thank you, JP, and thank you, everyone. And to sum up, we know that Ivory Coast is actually facing serious food insecurity, even though they are wealthy enough. For example, agriculture or poverty or some conflicts between the refugees and citizens. And even though like it is wealthy enough in Africa, we know that African countries are still suffering from their food problem and poverty. I think our young generation living in developed country should learn and acknowledge the problems occurring in those developing countries and trying to help by just doing easy aiding, like donating, spreading information. Yeah, that's easy, right? So we're all human and all of us should be treated equally. So let's just try to help them to create a prosperous, globalized world. That's it.